On the night of November 24th, 1971, a man bought a one-way ticket to nowhere. He didn't need a return flight. He already had an exit plan, and it involved a parachute, $200,000 in cash, and the black void of the Pacific Northwest storm. He called himself Dan Cooper. The airline agent who typed his ticket never questioned the name. Nobody questioned anything about this man, a calm, well-dressed figure sitting alone in seat 18C, sipping bourbon and smoking cigarettes like he was on his way to a business meeting. In a way, he was. Northwest Orient Flight 305 departed Portland, Oregon, bound for Seattle. 36 passengers, a small crew, and one man with a plan so audacious, so perfectly executed, that 50 years later, the Federal Bureau of Investigation still cannot tell you who he really was. That is not a cold case. That is a ghost story. Shortly after takeoff, the man in 18C passed a handwritten note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a phone number. She tucked it into her pocket without reading it. The man leaned forward and said, quietly, calmly, 4 words that changed American aviation history forever. "Miss, you'd better look at that." She opened the note. It read, "I have a bomb." Florence Schaffner would later describe his voice as controlled, measured, almost gentle. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't sweating. He showed her the inside of his briefcase, a tangle of red cylinders, wires, and a large cylindrical battery. Whether it was real or not, nobody on that plane was willing to find out. He had one demand: $200,000 in negotiable $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. The plane circled Puget Sound for 2 hours while FBI agents scrambled to pull together the ransom. Bank tellers counted out 10,000 bills. The serial numbers were recorded on microfilm. The air money weighed roughly 21 pounds. Every detail was documented, every detail except for one: what happened after the money left the plane. When Flight 305 touched down in Seattle, the passengers were released. The crew remained. The plane was refueled, and Cooper, cool as January ice, strapped the money to his body, clipped on one of the parachutes, and ordered the pilots to fly southeast toward Mexico City at the lowest possible altitude, with the landing gear down and the flaps partially deployed. He wanted to fly slow. He wanted to fly low. He was not a nervous man making desperate demands. He was a man executing a blueprint. At approximately 8:17 in the evening, somewhere over the dense wilderness of southwestern Washington state, a warning light blinked in the cockpit. The aft air stair, a rear staircase unique to the Boeing 727, had been lowered from inside the aircraft. The crew interphoned the back of the plane. No response. A few minutes later, the tail of the aircraft shuddered. A pressure change, a rush of cold night air. He was gone. The temperature outside that plane was 7 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The wind chill was catastrophic. Rain was falling. Visibility was near 0. He jumped into that storm wearing loafers, a business suit, and a thin raincoat, carrying $200,000 and whatever secrets lived behind those dark sunglasses he'd worn the entire flight. The FBI launched one of the most exhaustive manhunts in American history. Hundreds of agents, military search teams, civilian volunteers combing through 60 miles of Pacific Northwest wilderness. They found nothing. Not a body, not a parachute, not a single dollar bill. For years, the case produced suspects, but never solutions. a retired airline employee, a former paratrooper, a man named L.D. Cooper, a man named Richard Floyd McCoy, who pulled a nearly identical hijacking just 5 months later, except McCoy got caught, got convicted, and later got shot escaping from a federal penitentiary. The FBI considered him a strong suspect. They ultimately ruled him out. Then, in February 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was picnicking with his family along the banks of the Columbia River, about 40 miles downstream from the suspected drop zone. He reached into the sandy riverbank and pulled out 3 deteriorating packets of $20 bills. The serial numbers matched. Exactly 290 bills from the Cooper ransom, roughly $5,800 worth. It was the only physical evidence ever recovered. What does it mean? Nobody knows for certain. Did the money wash downstream over years? Did Cooper bury part of his haul and never return? Or does it mean something far darker? That the money reached the river because the man carrying it never made it out of those trees alive. The FBI officially suspended active investigation of the case in July 2016, after 45 years. They cited the need to redirect resources. They did not say the case was solved. They did not say the man was dead. They simply stepped back from a door that had never once opened. And still the questions breathe. Was he military? The precision of his plan suggests someone deeply familiar with aircraft, parachute equipment, and high-altitude jumping. Was he local? Someone who knew those Washington forests well enough to believe he could disappear inside them? Was he even a him? For decades, investigators assumed so, but the profile is incomplete. The evidence is fragmentary. The truth sits somewhere in the dark between Portland and Seattle, between the last bourbon he ordered and the moment the staircase light came on. More than 200 named suspects have been investigated. Dozens of people have claimed on their deathbeds or in letters or through surviving family members that they were Dan Cooper. None of those claims has ever been verified. None of them has brought investigators one step closer to certainty. He bought a ticket. He made a demand. He collected his money. He stepped into the freezing night sky over a country he seemed to understand completely. A country where, if you move quietly enough, if you plan carefully enough, if you're willing to disappear entirely, you just might get away with it. And maybe he did. The money is still largely missing. The parachutes were never found. The briefcase was never found. The man was never found. Somewhere out there, in the silence between those towering Pacific Northwest pines, the greatest unsolved hijacking in American history is still waiting to be explained. And the man at the center of it is either a skeleton the forest never gave back, or an old man who lived his whole quiet life knowing exactly what he'd done. Either way, he won.